Welcome back to day 3 of the Josie Bra Pants tutorial. Yesterday you learned lots of elastic sewing techniques. Today we will put those skills to use as we make the Josie bra. Let's start with piece C, which is the piece that looks like this, and it's the lower back strap. If you're using jersey, it will look something like this, and if you're using lace, this is the one. You could layer the two if you want to, but for this tutorial, I'm just going to use lace. We're going to start by sewing elastic onto the scalloped edge. You can either use plush elastic for this or fold over elastic. To keep it consistent for this tutorial, I'm going to keep using this one throughout. You want to find your little drill point that we marked with chalk earlier and make sure that you don't sew the elastic beyond that point. To begin, make sure that your fabric is facing with the wrong side up towards you and have your fold over elastic folded over. You're going to sew this elastic 5 millimeters below where the scallop finishes. Make sure your machine is set up to a zigzag stitch on a medium width. That's me, good to go. And then let's start with a little back stitch. Once you've done your back stitch, you can gently start to stretch the elastic out. And I'm just sewing straight down the middle of this fold over elastic. I'm just at my drill point, so I'm going to do a little back stitch there. And then trim my thread and trim my elastic. So there you can see we've got elastic all the way along the scalloped edge up to the drill point. Now we need to sew elastic onto the inside edge. Make sure you're not sewing it onto the bottom edge, which is the one with the notch. This time we're going to use a slightly different technique, which is called SFRE, sewing fold over elastic onto a raw edge. I'm going to have my shiny side of my elastic facing down and the right side of my lace facing up. And I'm just going to zigzag straight down the middle of the elastic, starting with a little back stitch. And we're going to take this elastic all the way up to the top of the lace. And do a little back stitch at the top. And trim away. Now we want to flip the elastic, and because I've done bright ochre stitching, you should be able to see it really clearly. We're going to do one more line of stitching just next to the last line of stitching that we did, gently pulling the lace across as we do it. Nice little back stitch at the top and trim away any excess. And that is your first piece done and dusted. Let me just neaten that off. So that's how your lower back strap should look. Obviously you need a pair, so make sure you do the other side, and then we can move on to the next step. Now that both our lower back straps are done, we can place them out of the way, ready to pick up later. Next, we're going to work on the cups. So grab your pieces A and B, and if you're layering lace and jersey, you're simply going to sandwich the pieces together. You want to have the right side of both fabrics facing up. Same thing with piece A. I'm going to pop a couple of pins in just to hold them in place. And then we want to attach pieces A and B together. So we're going to pin them first, matching up your notches, which you should have cut into your jersey. And with this, don't be afraid to use quite a lot of pins, because you want to make sure you get all 4 layers really nicely lined up. Okay, perfect. I'll come back to that one. We're ready to sew this one. So we've got a 7mm seam allowance. And we're just gonna take it really slow on this curve. And I find it easier to do this with a straight stitch rather than a zigzag. You can zigzag it if you want, or you can overlock it, but I prefer just a straight stitch. Start with a little back stitch, and then as you go, just make sure all 4 layers are lined up. Taking the curve really slow. That is our first piece sewn together. Let me do the other side. Now that we've got our cup pieces sewn together, we're gonna attach some elastic to them. So take one side, and if your jersey is rolling like this, you might wanna pop a couple of pins in, just so that it's sitting beautifully along the edge of that scalloped lace. Remember that the jersey will be slightly smaller than the lace. That's how it's meant to be, because we added the scallops on. Perfect, happy with that. Now we're gonna add some elastic. Again, you can use plush or fold over for this bit. I'm gonna recommend folding over your fold over elastic. And you want to make sure that the elastic covers the edge of the jersey. So take it real nice and slow. Make sure you're on a zigzag stitch and start with a little back stitch at the bottom. And I'm just really carefully covering the edge of the jersey. Gently stretching out the elastic as I go. Finish with a little back stitch and then trim your thread and elastic. So you can see we've got a nice line of stitching on the right side, and we've hidden the edge of the jersey on the back with the elastic. Now we're going to sew elastic all the way along this edge. So once again, make sure your lace is lined up with the edge of your jersey. You can pin it if you want, I'm just going to go for it. And we're using the SFRE technique, which is sewing fold over elastic onto a raw edge. So we're going to have shiny side of the elastic facing down. Start with a little back stitch, and we're just going to sew all the way down the middle of the fold over elastic, which isn't folded this time. Taking it really nice and slow on the curve and gently stretching it out around 10%. Finish with a little back stitch and then trim your thread and elastic as before. Now we're going to flip that piece of elastic, and you can see we get this really neat finish, and we just need to zigzag that down. Ever so gently stretching the fabric away from the fold. Little back stitch to finish, and that is one side completely done. Beautiful. Now we're going to do the other side to match. Now that we've got elastic sewn onto our cups and our lower straps, we're going to attach the two together. So you should notice there is a little notch at the bottom of your piece C, which is the lower strap, and you want to line that notch up with where your elastic finishes on your cup. So you're creating a little triangle of overlap, and we're going to pin that in place and then stitch it. So we're just going to stitch around that triangle so it's all really nice and secure. You can do this with either a zigzag or a straight stitch. I think I'm going to stick with zigzag for this one. there we have our lovely little triangle. Now do the same thing on the other side. Now that we've sewn the cup to the lower back strap, we're going to attach the shorter underband. So, have all your pieces laid out like this. You can either do this again in lace or jersey or a combination of the two. I'm going to demonstrate with just lace because I think it's going to look really beautiful with this combination. There should be a notch in the center front of your underband piece, and you're going to take your cut pieces with right sides together and you're going to line them up at the center front notch. And take your time with this pinning and make sure you're really happy with it before you sew. There are a few more notches along the way for you to match up your cut pieces to on the underband, so look out for those. And then pin your other side at the same time. Your elastics should be right up next to each other here at the center front. Now that we're pinned, we can come over to the machine and sew that in place. And we want to keep this stitch really close to the edge so that in a moment we can hide it underneath some elastic. I'm going to keep it on a zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to take it really slow all the way across, keeping all of my raw edges perfectly lined up. Just making sure my seam allowances are pressing the right way, and a nice little back stitch at the end, and trim your thread. So you can see we've attached the underband to the cups, and now we need to sew elastic onto the top of that underband and the bottom of that underband, and that will give a really nice amount of support. So now is a good opportunity to trim any excess threads out of your way. Make sure you've got a really nice smooth line going on at the bottom here. And then grab some elastic. So I'm going to start sewing my elastic from the very end of the underband piece, and I've got the shiny side facing down, the matte side facing up. And I'm basically going to sew this elastic all the way along the seam allowance which I've just created. Again, using a zigzag stitch. I've just noticed I'm about to run out of this colour thread and I don't have any more of it. So I'm going to play a game of chicken with the thread and see if I can get to the end of this little section, and then I'm going to have to swap colours. It's going to be really close. Oh my gosh. I don't think I'm going to make it. No! Okay. This is what not to do at home. Make sure you have enough thread before you start a project. What colour should I swap over to? Okay, we're going to go to the turquoise. It's still going to look beautiful. There's just going to be a funny moment where you can see where I've gone from ochre to turquoise. I actually think the turquoise looks nicer. Now that you've stitched your elastic along here, on mine you can see where I ran out of the right colour thread. We're going to flip the whole thing over to the right side, and then we're just going to zigzag stitch to keep that elastic sitting really nice and flat. Okay, beautiful. Now you have the option of either leaving a scalloped edge along the bottom or adding a line of elastic to the bottom as well. I'm going to add the elastic so that you see how to do it. So in order to do that, I'm going to trim away the scalloped edge so we've got a straight edge. And then using exactly the same technique, you're going to apply elastic to that bottom edge. We're so nearly there. Once you've done your first line of zigzag stitching, you're going to flip it over and then just do your second line to secure it in place. Wonderful. Trim away any excess so you've got a nice smooth line at the end. And you'll really start to see it coming together now. All that is left to be done is we're going to add the hook and eye closure and pop a little gold ring in the back to make the straps come together. So let's do that. If you were sewing the longer underband version, you wouldn't need to put this in, you would have just sewn one continuous loop in that section. With our hook and eye closure, on one side you want the eyes and they're going to be facing up, and on the other side you want the hooks and they are going to be facing down. So let's sew them in place. I'm starting with the hook side of the hook and eye closure, and if you want you can put a zipper foot on your machine. What I would say is definitely switch it over to a straight stitch for this bit. Pop your needle in and then do a nice strong back stitch. And a nice strong back stitch when you finish as well. And that is one side on and good to go. Let's do the other side. I'm moving my needle right over so I can get in really close. And again, just a straight stitch. So that will do up at the back like so, which is a really neat professional finish. And then we just need to pop our gold hoop through the lower back straps. And I normally fold over around 2 centimeters and stitch that in place. Now that our ring is sewn in at the bottom, we can thread the top straps through, and this is where you might want to have a try on to check the length of the straps are just right for you. Pop a pin or a safety pin just to hold them in place, and you can always ask a friend to adjust them if you need. For me, folding them over again around 2 or 3 centimeters is about right. And then I'm just going to stitch them in place and that'll be it done. Make sure you've trimmed away all your loose threads. And you can also trim away any excess strap that you don't want at the back. Well done, you've made it to the end of day 3 and you've made an entire bra in one day. I hope all of the techniques that we learnt yesterday came into good use and you feel really happy with what you've created. Tomorrow we'll be making the Josie pants, which I promise you will be a walk in the park after today. I'll see you there.